Donald Trump currently holds a commanding lead over Joe Biden according to polling. Trump leads Biden by 1.8% according to Real Clear Politics. Factored in mind that Joe Biden won the popular vote by 4.5 points in 2020 and barely won the Electoral College. Furthermore, Trump leads in 8 of the 10 most recent polls. However, the U.S. uses the Electoral College system, which gives states the right to elect a president, not the popular vote. In today's video, we will be taking a look at the Electoral College according to the most recent poll out of all 50 states. Now let's get right into today's video. First off, in the state of Washington here. Washington, according to the most recent poll, Joe Biden sits at 54% to Donald Trump at 38%. This is a 60% margin in favor of Joe Biden, which is sufficient for a safe margin. Now going to the state of Oregon. In the state of Oregon here, a similar margin in favor of Joe Biden, 51% to 35%. Again, around a 16% margin in the state of Oregon. California is the first warning sign for Joe Biden as he leads in the state 56% to 37%. Now that is still a solid margin in the U.S.'s largest state by population. However, Joe Biden did not win the state by 19 points in 2020, he won the state by 29 points. This 10-point reduction in support is concerning for Biden, but nonetheless he will easily carry the state of California. Now going to the state of Alaska. Alaska generally has a couple more third-party voters. However, in this poll, it does suggest that Trump will win the state by a safe margin of 53% to 41%, or a 12% margin. Now going to the state of Hawaii. Hawaii had a relatively competitive Democratic caucus with about 32% of the electorate voting uncommitted or for Marianne Williamson. You might think that Biden has a reduction in support in the state. However, as of right now, Joe Biden holds a 36% lead over Donald Trump in the most recent poll, or about a 2-to-1 margin. Now, the next state is the first competitive state on the map here, the state of Nevada. In the state of Nevada, the most recent poll suggests that Donald Trump is up 6% over Joe Biden, or 46% to 40%. However, 40% of the poll are undecided or are going for a third-party candidate, which means that there's still a lot of room for change. Nevertheless, this is a good sign for Donald Trump. This is one of the states that Donald Trump lost in both 2016 and 2020, but he has a chance of actually flipping the state. Right now, according to polling, not only in this recent poll, but also polling in general, shows Trump has a decent chance of flipping the state of Nevada. I'd argue that he is favored. Hispanic support for Joe Biden has generally decreased, and for Donald Trump, it has increased, leading to part of the reason why he is up in the poll, and according to most polls. Now going to the state of Arizona, we see a similar situation. Donald Trump leads in the most recent poll 47% to 40%. Again, a similar 13% of the electorate is undecided. However, this is still great news for Donald Trump. He held about 48% to 49% of the vote in 2020. Despite being several months away from the election, he is already holding a similar amount of support, while Joe Biden trails his performance by about 9 points compared to his 2020 performance. Polls consistently suggest here that Donald Trump is favored against Joe Biden. However, there are still undecided voters that may still skew the state. Nevertheless, it is still very good news for Donald Trump. This is one of the 5 states, the states of Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that voted for Trump in 2016, that voted for Biden in 2020, that Trump will be playing offense in 2024 in an attempt to flip back. Now going to the state of Idaho here. Trump leads Biden 55% to 26%. Now, what is interesting is that, again, about 20% of the population is undecided or going third party. However, that doesn't really matter. We all know that Donald Trump will win the state of Idaho commandingly. Now, going to the state of Utah. The most recent poll has Trump at just 46% to Biden at 38%. That would be concerning for Trump if that was really the case. However, the poll I don't think is really accurate, featuring just 166 likely voters. Quite a small sample size considering most polls have about a 1,000 to 2,000 sample size. Nevertheless, this is still the most recent poll, so I had to factor this into the video. Therefore, Trump only leads by 8% in the state of Utah, comparable to the states of Nevada and Arizona. Next, the state of Montana. In the state of Montana, Joe Biden trails Donald Trump 35% to 56%. This will give Trump a slight increase in his victory margin from 2020. Going to the state of Wyoming, the state that was reddest for Donald Trump back in 2020, only 2 counties voted for Joe Biden. We see that Joe Biden only holds 15% of the vote to Donald Trump at 68% in the most recent poll. Going to the state of Colorado, with again a relatively small sample of just 170 likely voters, you do see that Joe Biden leads 48% to 44%. However, that is a remarkably small margin, as Biden won the state by a safe margin back in 2020 of 13.5 percentage points. Now going to the state of New Mexico here. Joe Biden leads in the most recent poll 49% to 41%. Again, this is a relatively close race, as Joe Biden is not at 50%, but it's likely that Biden will be able to win the state in 2024. Now going to the state of North Dakota here. In the state of North Dakota, Donald Trump again leads, holding 54% of the vote to Joe Biden at 17%. It is definitely remarkable that 29% of the population is either undecided or voting for third parties. However, it just shows that some voters are generally reluctant to give their preferences in some of these polls. Nevertheless, Donald Trump does carry the state of North Dakota. In the state of South Dakota here, a similar margin but slightly less for Donald Trump. He leads 55% to 26%. Again, a relatively sizable margin of the population say they are undecided or voting for a third party. That percentage is about 20%. Now going to the state of Nebraska. Now we don't have the district-wide numbers, but it does show overall. The state of Nebraska is voting for Donald Trump, according to this poll, 53% to 35%. Now this is a comparable margin to 2020, and in 2020, Joe Biden won the second district by 7 points. However, the district is slightly redder, and I think in this instance, we will give it to Joe Biden here by about a lean to tilt margin, while Donald Trump sweeps the rest of the state. Now going to the state of Kansas here. In the state of Kansas, we see a margin comparable to 2020, where Trump leads 46% to 31% against Joe Biden in the most recent poll. Now going to the state of Oklahoma here. In the state of Oklahoma, we see that 55% of the voters say they're going to vote for Donald Trump, and 27% say Joe Biden, again a comparable total to 2020. Now the next state, the state of Texas, this is a battleground with the second most electoral college influence in the United States, and by 2050s, this may be the most populated state in the entire union. Nevertheless, here Trump still leads Joe Biden by a similar margin to what he won the state by in 2016. He leads by 9% over Joe Biden, 51% to 42%. However, the state is still technically in play, but we do see that Trump is very likely to end up carrying the state, as he's already over 50% in the state. Now going to the state of Louisiana. Now the most quote-unquote recent poll was conducted in 2022, around September 6th. So quite a long time ago. However, the state does say that it will vote for Donald Trump by a margin of 51% to 36%, putting it in the safe Republican column. Next, the state of Arkansas. In the state of Arkansas, the most recent poll has Donald Trump at 57% to Joe Biden at just 24%, or less than a quarter of voters. That would be a remarkable improvement for Donald Trump, but I mean, everyone knows that he will win the state of Arkansas. Now going to the state of Missouri. In the state of Missouri here, Donald Trump at 49% to Joe Biden at 32%. Again, this is not really much of a surprise. We all know that Donald Trump will win the state of Missouri, and that this margin is comparable to his margin in 2020. Now going to the state of Iowa here, this is by Des Moines Register, essentially the gold standard poll for the state of Iowa. But in this poll, it suggests that Donald Trump is up 15 points against Joe Biden, 48% to 33%, which is a safe margin. This would be quite an incredible feat because of the fact that the state was essentially a bellwether for decades, as Democrats sometimes won the state but did not win the presidency. In this time around, regardless who wins the presidency, Iowa will be quite a safe state for Donald Trump, at least according to this map. Now going to the state of Minnesota, again a sampling size of just 125 likely voters, but in the state, although the Democratic primary there suggested 20% of the voters were voting uncommitted, it does seem as though that Joe Biden is going to win the state according to this poll by 7 points. Again, it is a small sample. Going to the state of Wisconsin here, we do see that the most recent poll has Donald Trump up 45% to 42%. Again, there are 13% of undecideds who will likely end up deciding the election. I do believe that most of those undecideds would end up voting. Now, what is crucial in the state are again the wild counties, as well as the rural turnout and the Democratic turnout in general in Milwaukee, which is pretty much the most important city, as well as that in the city of Madison. But on this map here, Donald Trump will end up winning the state by a lean margin. Now going to the state of Illinois. The state is trending towards the Republican Party. However, the most recent poll has Joe Biden up by just 9% over Donald Trump here, 43% to 34%. Quite a close margin for the state, which will come down as likely for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. Now going to the state of Indiana, another state where Donald Trump is polling quite well. Trump is at 55% to Joe Biden at 34%, which is a 21% margin for Donald Trump, which does mean that he will win the state by a safe margin on this map. Now going to the state of Michigan. According to the most recent poll here, we do see that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are tied in the race. However, according to the poll taken the day before that, because I don't want to leave the state blank, Emerson does have Trump up 46% to 44% on a 1-to-1 matchup, which does mean the state will go down as the lean Republican state. Again, I do think that Emerson is quite a trustworthy poll with 1,000 likely voters. I do think that it is quite credible, so I'm going to put it on the map despite the fact it is not technically the most recent poll. Now going to the state of Mississippi. Again, this is a poll that was taken more than a year ago. However, the poll was taken on September the 6th of 2022, but it does have Joe Biden trailing Donald Trump here in the state of Mississippi by a margin of 36% to 54%, or a difference of 18 percentage points. At this point, with more than half of the Electoral College votes allocated, we see that Donald Trump is at 172 electoral votes to Joe Biden at 123. Now the next state here is the state of Ohio, with its state being a bellwether state for more than 60 years until it broke its record back in 2020, where it voted for Trump by 8 points despite Biden winning the election. We see that in the most recent poll, Trump is up 47% to Joe Biden at 36%, quite a wide margin of about 11 points, which is just under a safe margin. Nevertheless, this is an impressive win for Donald Trump, as it ensures that the Rust Belt is more and more favorable to the Republican Party. Now going to the state of Kentucky here, the most recent poll has Donald Trump up here 55% to 26%. This is not a remarkably close race. Again, we do not expect anything different. Kentucky is a safe Republican state. Going to the state of West Virginia here, we see that Donald Trump is at 59% to Joe Biden at 23%. Now, the state does have a Democratic senator who is retiring, Joe Manchin, but aside from that, is a very conservative state. The state still has a lot of Democratic registration. In fact, the plurality of the state apparently is registered as Democrats, but we all know that Trump will win the state of West Virginia. Most Democrats in the state are actually voting for the Republican candidate back in 2012, 2016, and 2020. They just did not change their registration. Now going to the state of Tennessee here, we see that Trump is up 25 points against Joe Biden, 59% to 34% in the most recent poll. Going to the state of Alabama here, it is a comparable margin to what we see in 2020, but Trump is at 57% to Joe Biden at 38%, just under a 20% margin. Now going to the state of Pennsylvania. This is interesting. This is Joe Biden's home state, the state that he was born in. Now the state that he serves as a senator from is the state of Delaware. In the most recent poll, we see that Joe Biden is up 40% to 39%. However, again, 21% of the electorate is undecided. This is interesting because, generally speaking, the polls in Pennsylvania have had Donald Trump up by various margins, but generally at around 2%. So the polls had him up by up to 6 or 7%. However, in this one quote-unquote outlier poll, we do see that Trump is actually down 1% against Joe Biden. Nonetheless, because this is just factoring the most recent polls, I'm going to give the state to Joe Biden here by 1% or a tilt margin. Now look at the Electoral College results here. Joe Biden is at 142 electoral votes, while Donald Trump is at 221 electoral votes, just 11 short of the presidential electoral votes he got back in 2020. Now the next states I'm going to be taking a look at is from New England. The next area I'm going to be talking about is the District of Columbia. DC actually also has some polls here. The most recent poll has Donald Trump at a whopping 5% of the vote, while Joe Biden is at 94%. Quite a slim margin, isn't it? 89% in favor of Joe Biden in the District of Columbia. Now in the state of Maryland, Joe Biden is ahead by 23% against Donald Trump, 55% to 32%. However, that is a reduction in support compared to 2020 when he won the state by about 30%. This is one of the most liberal states, if not the most liberal state in the union. Now going to the next two states, Delaware and New Jersey, both don't have any polls. Delaware is Joe Biden's home state. I'm going to presume that is safe. And New Jersey, it might go down as likely, but I'm going to play it as safe just for this video. However, the state actually has a competitive Senate primary because Robert Menendez decided to not seek re-election because of his scandals, and his son Bob Menendez is also fighting for his seat because of his dad's scandal, but that's not really important for this video's stake. Now going to this state of Connecticut, Joe Biden is below 50% here. He is at 49% to Donald Trump at 36%. Though the margin is actually quite tight, I don't think Biden has much to worry about in a state like Connecticut. However, the next state is a state where Joe Biden actually has some things to worry about. That is the state of New York. We did see that Lee Zeldin against Kathy Hochul, the race was decided by single digits. It was about 8 points in the governor's level. Chuck Schumer, who was previously electoral juggernaut, only won the state by 15 points, a much slimmer margin than the 2020 presidential election results. We see that in the most recent poll, we see that Joe Biden is at, again, below 50% at 48% to Donald Trump, who sits at 36%. 36% is roughly on par with what Trump got in 2020. However, 48% is a remarkable reduction in support here again for Joe Biden. This is consistent with the fact that Joe Biden is not doing too well on the popular vote or national vote level. So that is still a safe state because it is still 12 points. Now going to the state of Vermont. In the state of Vermont, this is the one state where Nikki Haley actually won a primary over Donald Trump, though there was a lot of crossover voting. We see that for the state of Vermont here, it does seem like that Joe Biden will win the state, according to the most recent poll, 59% to 28% for Donald Trump. Now going to the state of New Hampshire, this is a state where it's more white college educated. We see that in the most recent poll, Joe Biden is at 52% to Donald Trump at 45%. Compared to some of the other states, we see quite few undecideds. Some of the other states have upwards of 20%, and in one state, upwards of 30% of its voters being considered undecided. However, in this state, there's only 3% of voters in this poll that consider themselves as undecided. However, that is a 7-point margin for Joe Biden. For reference here, Biden is actually at a higher number in New Hampshire than New York, though that is because New York has more undecideds. Now for the state of Maine here. The state of Maine here, you see the at-large vote is actually saying the most recent poll that the Maine at-large vote is going 6% for Donald Trump. However, again, there's a tremendous problem with undecideds. 30% of the voters are undecided. 38% say Trump, 32% say Biden. Now, another problem for the Republicans is that there's a lot of voters who say Trump who are actually not going to vote for Trump. The 2nd congressional district, where more Republicans are located, they generally have a lower voter turnout for some reason. I don't know why, and I don't think pretty much anyone knows why, but Generally speaking, the second district has lower turnout, and therefore the first district dominates in terms of how much of the vote actually the vote comes from in that district compared to the second district. Now, in the first district, Joe Biden is only up by, I believe, 8%, 39 to 31. While for the second congressional district, Trump is up by 20. Quite an impressive margin considering in previous elections, we actually see that the second district just 20 years ago was safely in the Democratic column. Now Donald Trump is winning the at-large vote by 8 and also winning the second district by 20, while Joe Biden is hanging on to Maine's first congressional district by single digits. Just a recap of the current electoral college situation, Joe Biden is at 215 electoral votes to Donald Trump at 224. The two gentlemen are now neck and neck between each other. Now, Joe Biden will carry the state of Massachusetts, according to the most recent poll, 59% to 34%, which is a 25% margin. This is a state where all the counties voted for Joe Biden. I think the only state in the entire United States to end up doing so. Now, going to the state of Rhode Island here, we see that in the state of Rhode Island, Joe Biden is at 49% to Trump at 32% in the most recent poll, another safe state. Now going to the state of Virginia. Virginia, in its most recent poll, has Joe Biden at 49% to Trump at 42%. Though only a 7% difference, it is unlikely that Trump will end up flipping the state, though the state looks to be slightly closer than it was in 2020, sorry. Now going to the state of North Carolina. In the most recent poll, Trump leads Joe Biden by 5%, 50% to 45%. This is a state that Trump carried by less than 2% in 2020, in fact, by less than 1.5%. It should be a very close race, but right now, Trump is definitely dominating in the state of North Carolina. Now going to the state of South Carolina, we see a comparable margin again to 2020. Trump is at 51% to Joe Biden at 37%. This is still a margin of about 14% for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. Now in the state of Georgia, now in this particular poll, we see that Biden is at 51%, Biden's at 48%, and Trump is at 51%. However, in some of the other polls, we have seen much worse results for Joe Biden over Donald Trump here. Joe Biden was polling about 7 to 8% below Donald Trump in some of the recent polls, but the most recent poll has Trump leading by just 3%. However, nonetheless, this would be a flip, and right now with Trump at 249 electoral votes, he is much closer now to the presidency than Joe Biden is. However, it all comes down to the state of Florida, just like the 2000 election. Now in the state of Florida, demographics and politics has evolved rapidly. About a decade ago, this is pretty much the most competitive state and the most important state for any election. In 2000, for example, the state pretty much decided the entire presidential election, and for many of the other previous elections, Florida was extremely crucial to both sides' chances of victory. However, in the most recent poll here, as well as the trends generally in the state, Joe Biden is down against Donald Trump here by about 11%, 45% for Donald Trump, 34% for Joe Biden, which is on the verge of a safe margin. Overall, in this particular map, Donald Trump is at 295 to Joe Biden at 243. Consequently, those are the same margins as what I had in my most recent election night. Now, this map looks okay for Biden. However, there are several areas of concern for Joe Biden. First of all, the state of Maine is not looking too good for Biden. Democrats generally win the state by a safe margin, which is concerning again for Democrats. Now, the state of Pennsylvania here is shaded blue. However, generally most of the polls do have Trump ahead, and pretty much the rest of the Rust Belt doesn't look too good for Democrats either. What we see is that some of the competitive states, for example, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, these states, even if they're not going for Biden, they should be in the tilt margin. They should be within 2%. However, in a state like Nevada or Arizona, for instance, Trump is leading by more than 5. North Carolina, Trump is leading by 5. Georgia, in the vast majority of polls, Trump is leading by 5. You see that the overall trajectory is looking very good for Donald Trump. Again, polling underestimated Trump in 2020. However, polls do have a tendency to underestimate incumbents. Perhaps they're going to underestimate Joe Biden. We never know, but in this particular map, we see that Donald Trump is dominating, not necessarily in the Electoral College, but in the state margins. The fact that he is leading in the popular vote, according to RCP, in 8 of the 10 polls, speaks volumes to the fact that Joe Biden is not doing too well nationally. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. As you can see on my screen right now, the vast majority of you guys are not subscribed. Make sure to also watch the video on your left and subscribe on your right. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.